There comes a point where you have to stop asking whether you're being lied to. And you have to start asking whether anyone in power even cares that you know you're being lied to. Because when the Attorney General of the United States sits before Congress, raises her right hand, swears an oath to tell the truth, and then proceeds to dodge, deflect, and filibuster her way through basic questions about justice in this country, and then nothing happens, you begin to wonder if the whole exercise is just theater. Expensive, taxpayer-funded theater. And we, the public, are the ones who didn't get the memo that the show is all fake. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another supplemental installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. A podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your host. And what I want to talk about today is what happened this week when Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before Congress. And let's just get this out of the way right up front. If you were hoping for clarity, accountability, or even sanity, let alone the basic courtesy of straight answers from the nation's top law enforcement official, well, you're going to be as disappointed as I was. Because what we got instead was a masterclass in deflection, political performance, falsehood, and something that looked an awful lot like blind loyalty to one man. Not the Constitution, not the rule of law, and certainly not the American people, but to just one man. And that right there is the problem. Now, I want to walk you through this in a way that hopefully makes sense, without the legal jargon, no Beltway nonsense, just plain English, because what happened in that room matters, not just because of what Pam Bondi said, but because of what she refused to say. And because of what Congress, once again, appears unwilling or unable to do about it. From the moment the hearing began, the tone was set. Bondi entered not like a neutral law enforcement official tasked with serving justice, but like a political surrogate. That might sound harsh. Well, stick with me here. When you're the Attorney General of the United States, your job is not to be a hype person. Your job is not to be a propagandist. Your job is to represent the Department of Justice, the institution that is supposed to enforce the law fairly and evenly without fear or favor. That is the job. And yet over and over again during this hearing, Bondi behaved less like the nation's chief law enforcement officer and more like a cable news defender of Donald Trump. At one point, she launched into glowing praise of him, not just as a president she supports, not just as someone she believes is doing good things, but as, quote, the best president in the history of this country, end quote. The best in the entire history of the United States. 250 years of presidents. And apparently, we have reached the pinnacle. Dear Lord, save us. Now look, you could support the president. You can agree with his policies. That's fine. But when the Attorney General is sitting in front of Congress under oath, being questioned about ongoing investigations, about justice, about, potential wrongdoing tied to very powerful people, including Trump, and she sounds like she's delivering remarks at a campaign rally, that should make everyone uneasy. Because the Department of Justice is supposed to be independent. Supposed to be. Why does it seem like most people have totally forgotten that point? And it didn't stop there. And as I tell you this next part, remember that Kash Patel, FBI director, has said under oath to Congress that there is no credible evidence that anyone other than Jeffrey Epstein himself was involved in the crimes that he is associated with. No credible evidence. Now, when Bondi pressed on tough questions, especially surrounding the Epstein files and whether the Department of Justice has thoroughly pursued all credible leads and potential suspects, she repeatedly deflected. Sometimes by claiming she couldn't discuss ongoing investigations. What investigations are ongoing if the FBI director insists there is no credible evidence? Other times she pivoted to prepared talking points, and sometimes by making blanket statements that simply do not hold up under scrutiny. One of the most striking moments came when she stated that there was no evidence of crimes committed by Donald Trump. None. Just like that. Clean sweep. Case closed. Now think about that for a second. Not we're continuing to investigate, not we follow the evidence where it leads, not even I cannot comment on specific individuals. Nothing like that, no. She went straight to a definitive declaration. No evidence, period. At one point, Representative Becca Blint stepped in because, well, she did what many Americans wish more members of Congress would do in these situations. She didn't let it slide. She challenged the statement directly, calmly, clearly. She essentially said, hold on a minute. How can you make that claim so definitively? How can you sit there and tell this committee, and by extension the American people, that there is absolutely no evidence of wrongdoing connected to a man who has appeared in the documents so many times, who has had document associations, who has been named in various contexts tied to Jeffrey Epstein? There was also an exchange Bondi had with Ted Lieu, U.S. Representative from California. Now, this one, I'm going to read the quote from Lieu verbatim. This was in response to Bondi saying there was no evidence linking Trump to a crime and that everyone knows it. And this is what Lieu had to say. Quote, I believe you just lied under oath, and it's all on video. You said that there is no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you, here is a witness statement who called into the FBI Threat Operations Center. He drove Donald Trump around in a limo. He overheard what Donald Trump said to Jeffrey on his cell phone. He was so angry, he was going to stop and hurt Donald Trump. And he met a girl who said that she was raped by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. She later had her head blown off. And the officers at the scene said that could not have been a suicide. No one at the Department of Justice interviewed this witness. You need to interview this witness immediately. End quote. Lying under oath? I wasn't sure Congress even realized that wasn't allowed, but I'll get to that in a bit. Anyway, as far as that exchange with Lieu is concerned, don't take my word for it. I'll put a link to this video on the podcast website so that you can watch the exchange for yourself. I promise you I'm quoting it accurately. As for Bondi, well, she didn't really answer. Instead, what followed was a familiar dance, the kind we've all seen many, many times now. First, she feigned indignance at being accused of a crime, and then, when pressed, retreated into vagueness. Shift the framing, attack the premise, move on. It's political aikido, and it's become so routine in these hearings that it barely even registers anymore. Because when the Attorney General makes sweeping claims under oath, claims that appear to contradict publicly available information, or at least oversimplify a deeply complex and still unfolding case, it's more than just political spin. That's testimony, and testimony is supposed to matter. Supposed to. And yet here we are again. Another hearing, another round of evasive answers, another series of moments where, congressmen ask straightforward questions and receive, something other than straightforward answers. And then what happens? Nothing. No immediate consequences, no perjury referrals, no enforcement of subpoenas, just a lot of sternly worded exchanges, and then everyone goes home. Which raises a question that more and more Americans are starting to ask out loud. What is the point of these hearings if nobody is ever held accountable for what they say or refuse to say during them? Seriously, what is the point? Congress has subpoena power. That's not a suggestion. That's a constitutional authority. They can compel testimony. They can demand documents. They can refer witnesses for contempt. They can pursue perjury charges if someone lies under oath. Those powers exist for a reason. They're supposed to be part of the system of checks and balances. Oversight, accountability. Does anyone remember those words? But in practice, what we're seeing is something hugely different. We're seeing hearing after hearing after hearing where officials show up, deliver carefully crafted non-answers, dodge questions, sometimes make statements that stretch credibility to the breaking point, and then walk out of the room with their positions intact and their authority untouched. Imagine if an ordinary citizen did this, like in court. Imagine raising your right hand, swearing to tell the truth, and then responding to every direct question with evasions and half answers or statements that can't be reconciled with the known facts. How do you think that would go? Do you think the judge would just shrug and say, well, that was lively, thank you for coming in? Not a chance. But when it's powerful officials, different rules, different reality, I guess. And that brings us back to the Epstein files, the shadow that hung over the entire hearing. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. But the network of power and wealth and influence that surrounded him, that's very much alive, both in reality and in the public imagination. And for good reason. For years now, Americans across the political spectrum have asked the same basic question. Who else was involved? Who else knew? Who else benefited? And why does it feel like we keep getting partial answers, heavily redacted documents, and endless delays? During the hearing, lawmakers pressed Bondi on exactly that, on whether all credible leads are actually being followed, on whether powerful names are receiving special treatment, as to why some information remains hidden while other details, sometimes involving victims, have actually made it out. And again, what they got back was a wall of deflection, references to ongoing processes and assertions that the department is doing its job, and assertions of political targeting and Trump derangement syndrome. Lots of assurances, no specifics. I feel like this is a good time to mention again, Kash Patel said under oath there was no credible evidence of crimes beyond Epstein himself. So anyway, at one point, when confronted with suggestions that certain prominent figures might be receiving softer treatment, Bondi dismissed the notion as ridiculous. Ridiculous. But here's the thing. Simply saying a thing doesn't make it so, especially when the public trust is already fragile and there is so much information publicly available, especially when the Department of Justice is being asked to investigate people with enormous wealth and influence. In those circumstances, transparency can't be optional. It's essential. And that's where the anger really sets in, because for many Americans watching this hearing or others like it, it wasn't just about the details of any single case. I mean, it is, but it's also about the pattern of officials refusing to answer, the pattern of Congress expressing outrage and then doing nothing with that outrage. The pattern of accountability always seeming to stop just short of anything meaningful. You could almost feel the collective exhaustion through the screen. That sense of, here we go again, another round, another performance, another day where the truth feels just out of reach. And nobody with the power to demand it seems willing to push all the way. And look, this shouldn't be about party. It really shouldn't. If you strip away the red and the blue jerseys, what you're left with is a fundamental question about how our system is supposed to be working. Oversight only matters if it has teeth. Testimony only matters if lying has consequences. Subpoena power only matters if it's enforced. Otherwise, what we're watching isn't oversight, it's reality TV, as scripted as any we've seen before. We deserve better. We deserve a justice system that pursues truth wherever it leads, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's politically inconvenient, especially when it involves powerful people, because the rule of law means nothing if it only applies to the powerless. It's just a slogan, a talking point, a nice phrase we put on courthouse walls while we're working under a completely different set of rules behind closed doors. So when the Attorney General of the United States sits before Congress and behaves less like an independent guardian of justice and more like a doting crony, people notice. When sweeping claims are made without supporting details, people notice. When members of Congress push back, and then the moment passes with zero follow-through, people notice. And eventually, we have to start asking whether the system is working at all. That's the danger here. Not just any single statement from Pam Bondi, not just any single exchange with a member of Congress. Those are bad enough. But the real danger is the slow erosion of confidence, the creeping sense that accountability is optional for some and unavoidable for others. That there are two tracks of justice in the United States, one for the well-connected and one for everyone else. Because once again, people start believing that once the perception hardens into something closer to certainty, how can it be undone? Trust, once broken, doesn't just snap back into place. It erodes and erodes and erodes, and then it's gone. So yes, this hearing mattered. Certainly not because it produced clear answers. It didn't. Not because it resolved lingering questions. Not because there are any real repercussions for behavior. Didn't have either of those things either. It mattered because it offered yet another window into how power is exercised and how accountability is avoided in real time. It showed us once again the gap between what our institutions are supposed to be doing and what they're actually doing. And maybe the most frustrating part of all of this, none of this has to be inevitable. Congress has tools, real legal tools, constitutional tools. The power to compel truth, the power to punish dishonesty, the power to demand transparency. Those tools exist. The only question is whether anyone is willing to use them. Until they are, expect more hearings like this one, more carefully worded dodges, more political performances, more moments where the people watching are just shaking their heads and wondering whether anyone in Washington understands just how exhausted we are of being treated like an afterthought. We won't get real answers. The victims won't get real answers either. Because at the end of the day, justice isn't supposed to be a performance. It's supposed to be a promise. And right now, that promise feels awfully far away. Thank you once again for taking the time to download and listen to this installment of Back Porch Files. I really appreciate it and would love to hear from you. You can go to the website, www.neighborontheleft.com. There you can find lots of things, including links to social media for that you can use to contact the podcast. The email address is there. There's also an ever-growing blog with posts that match the episodes and a web player where you can listen to or download any of the episodes of the podcast. So I hope you'll stop on by. As I mentioned earlier, this week I'm going to put a link to that video exchange between Ted Lieu and Pam Bondi on there as well. So we'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.